Today's episode is presented by Lodestar, the fee experts.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Lodestar's Lending Leaders. Our guest is Mike Yu, co-founder at Vesta, a next-generation loan origination system. A lot more than that. I'm excited to get into it. Mike makes me feel old, everything that he's done at his age, from his time at Blend, his time in the industry, and other things. So really excited to dive into kind of technology and what's going on at Vesta. So Mike, thanks so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Right. So what not only brought you into the mortgage industry, but got you to actually start a company in a LOS space, which is competitive, high barrier to entry, not something that, folks grow up wanting to do?
Yeah, like pretty much everyone I've ever talked to in the industry, I got in almost entirely by accident. I was, looking for an early stage startup. I wanted to work on a product team. I wanted to work with some really smart people. And I was lucky enough to get introduced to Blend. And I was like, well, Blend, all these people seem really smart. What did they actually do? And this investor's like, well, they work on mortgages. And I was like, mortgages? I've never thought about working on mortgages. But of course, I ended up there mostly because I really respected and admired that team. And over a little more than 4 years, I got pretty entrenched in the industry. You spend a lot of time with lenders, you spend a lot of time with Fannie and Freddie and partners and things like that. With, one of our good mutual friends, Chris Mace, spent a lot of time with him.
Yep.
And after a little more than 4 years at Blend, I started to hear some themes over and over and over from, talking to all these people. The first was, hey, Mike, can you please build us a new LOS? I actually got that request from a few lenders. And when you hear that a few times, you start to think maybe that becomes a good idea. Another big one that we saw was really just the sheer amount of kind of manual work that was going into originating a mortgage. And it's like, everyone feels like it's not done as efficiently as it could be. It's getting done multiple times, pretty much without fail. It's getting done in systems that are maybe slower or unintuitive and people don't think it's a good experience. And so over the last 10 years, margins have gotten mostly worse. The costs have monotonically gone up, and everyone's out here pouring effort into technology, and it's still struggling to really bring costs down. And we saw that across the industry. And we sort of observed that we think the fundamental problem is you just need a reset in how this work is getting done, how people are deciding what work to do, so you can take the work away from people. And that really started with the LOS. So there was some lender demand. There was this kind of insight around how we were actually going to cut cost. And then finally, we noticed that there were a ton of these mortgage lenders and a ton of these really great innovative partners now, like yourselves and a bunch of other newer mortgage point solutions. And it was just surprisingly hard for lenders to innovate, to try new vendors, to try new technologies. And a lot of that was these vendors spent more than half their time integrating to these legacy systems and these legacy architectures. And so if we were going to go and do this really hard thing that you mentioned of, going and rebuilding a new LOS from scratch, making sure that we can give lenders something that's open architecture and future proof so that they can really be kind of innovation led companies, try new stuff really seamlessly. Everything is plug and play. That kind of was a core part of our philosophy as well. And so you kind of look at all those things together, and it was just kind of staring us in the face that hey, Mike and David, you should probably go build an LOS.
Right. And so obviously, a whole reset of a tech stack sounds like a great idea in terms of hey, let's just build everything from scratch. How hard can that be? Let's, create things the way we want it, knowing what we do now and not dealing with 15, 20-year-old legacy systems. But how do you actually convince a lender to do that? Because there's a lot of things that are, affecting that. Some people have employees that are admins of their current LOS, right? They have people that it's just so ingrained in what they do.
Yeah, I really think of this. I've said this over and over the history of the company. I really think of doing one of these big sales. This is a big project for a lender. Yeah. Along kind of three pillars that stand up making this project worthwhile. The first, which is really important, is really this aspirational pillar. It's a very asymmetric trade for someone to implement a new LOS. It's there's a lot of downside if you get it wrong. Yeah. And so you need to give some people almost this emotional, aspirational reason to be excited about this, which is really, hey, if you want to become a technology-led company, and not necessarily a company that builds your own technology or builds your own software, because I get banks telling me all the time, no, Mike, we're not going to do that, which I think, by the way, is pretty prudent. But you really want to say, hey, we differentiate with our consumers because we give them the best digital experience. We're able to differentiate because we use, best in breed solutions and bring them together, and we can manufacture at a lower cost. If you want to be that kind of technology-led company, you have to do it on kind of a next generation platform. And so sort of pillar one is this aspirational story, which is, hey, how do you become the lender that you really want to be? You've got to kind of fundamentally retool. That's a great story by itself, of course, but no one's buying on just that story.
Right.
Pillar two is the ROI case. And that's really where it comes down to, hey, you're spending a bunch on technology, you're spending a bunch on processing and underwriting and labor, and that's creating time to close and margin and thousands of dollars cost per loan. And if you execute this project and you switch to Vesta, other lenders have been able to save X dollars.
Right.
And so that's an important piece of these big project sales as well. And then finally, there's kind of this third pillar, which is what I call the surround sound unit of the ecosystem, which is, it is all about relationships. It's about meeting people like you or like, some other partners in the ecosystem. And it's about everyone kind of coming together. And every lender, I say, has like the partner that they call when they want to make a decision. Like in some cases it was Blend when I was there. In some cases, it's you. In some cases it's going to be their pricing engine, like whoever they really feel like they've connected with. And one thing that's important is that we're able to partner really well with everyone in the ecosystem. So there's kind of this surround sound unit of all the vendors in the ecosystem saying, hey, lenders, you should take a look at Vesta. And that's actually been a really successful part of our strategy so far. I think that, because, in many cases, like the software companies get it. Like we do an integration and they see how quickly we're doing an integration compared to some of, our peer set doing integration, or they see, how intricate we can get and how high quality that product can be. And so having those champions kind of throughout the ecosystem is kind of a big piece as well. And when you put all three together, I think that's really how you kind of start to develop the momentum to get people to do this really hard thing.
Yeah, that last point's really interesting. I got a call from a client the other day about a new vendor, like, hey, what do you know about these guys? Like, what do you think? Because, obviously a technology person is going to know technology. So I never really thought of that as kind of leveraging as much of the sales process too. I mean, that's all well and good, I think, until they say, hey, this is great. I see the ROI, but how the hell are we going to train our team on this? Right. Like, I feel like there's just so many, we're a plug-in solution. So just people contemplating making a huge switch is something that is just still kind of mind blowing to me.
Yeah, it's definitely not easy. Yeah. One big thing that we have also seen though, it is really important to make the implementation as productized as possible. And that includes, you mentioned training. Like if you want to get trained on a new LOS today, either you hire people who have used the LOS before, or it's like this huge grueling exercise of like trainers like flying out, or you just train the trainer or all sorts of crazy stuff. And the software doesn't have to be that hard. Like the idea that you need, a certification or like 40 hours of training to just use the software to do your job is a little bit crazy. Like no one trained me on how to use, Slack, Figma, or Notion, in order to write, or GitHub to write software.
Right.
And so there's definitely ways in which you can take a lot of these traditional implementation like and productize them. The shift to cloud infrastructure is a big one. Before in the start of your LS implementation, you spend like 6 months installing the data center. And like, going on-prem and setting it up and putting the routers in the data center at the bank and whatever. And so over time, a lot of that stuff has gotten more productized and more out-of-box feeling. And then workflow customization. So for us, that's all about how do you do no-code tooling so that lenders can kind of manage that themselves. You come out of the box with something relatively good. But really accelerating that so the implementation is less scary as well. But it's still a big project.
I mean, it's a lot of, obviously there's a legacy system aspect of some of that. And in some ways it's just sticky, right? Of like, hey, like, needing admins, needing all these things makes a product stickier. So just always fighting that. And I always think of, in the 80s with IBM, the big blue guarantee is no one gets fired for hiring IBM. Right? When you're a new company or a company trying to grow in the industry, you don't have that. Like someone will get fired for picking Lodestar if it doesn't work, right? So it's always certainly an LOS implementation that fails too. So there's just so much kind of momentum and friction that you're fighting against constantly.
Yeah, for sure. In many ways, it's like our job not to fail. Like people take bets on you, or they take bets on me and our companies, and those you have to take those bets really, really seriously, especially in the early days. It's like if you're one of the first 10 customers of Vesta, you have to be successful. Like we don't have a choice. If you're not successful, we're not going to be successful. And
well, that's always, I get that question, especially, we're in year 9 now, but always like, hey, how do I know your fees are accurate? And my honest answer is because they have to be, right? Because like if your fees are wrong, I'm screwed, right? Not only is that hurting you, but that's my entire business. So, it's always, having those same priorities aligned, I think is super helpful. of like, yeah, we're betting everything on this. I know you're betting a lot, but like, we're all in as well. So. Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And I really like that aspirational point of, what type of company you want to be, and how much of that is kind of like pitching where the industry is going, where you think things are going to be. Like, what is the danger of not switching to, a newer tech stack, or not relying on these legacy softwares as we get 5-10 years in the future?
Yeah, I actually say a lot that a ton of my job is just talking about where I think the industry is going. And I have this point of view that I tell every lender when we have this conversation, or any partner, which is, look, you may buy Vesta, you may not buy Vesta. At the end of the day, we have a overarching belief on where the industry is going in 5 to 10 years, where lenders are much more technology led. They're picking best in breed solutions and combining them. This firm kind of like technology thesis as to what happens to the industry. And if that thesis comes true, Vesta will be successfle. And I really believe that. And I don't know if that means we're going to have 20% market share or 50% or 80%. And you know what? That's like kind of my sales team's job to figure out what the number is and where the score comes out. But the most important thing for me is that everyone understands that, this is the direction that mortgage should go, and that comes true. Because if that doesn't come true, then I can almost be certain that we won't be successful. And so I think of a few things that I really view as, let's call them inevitable in mortgage. In origination specifically, but in mortgage more broadly as well. So one is that like seems very buzzwordy and easy to say, and it's definitely not true today, is that everything just has to be driven by the data. Right? There's this massive data set in mortgage, and everyone says like, oh, Encompass has 37,000 fields. Like there's a ton of data fields already. And that's definitely true. But there's even more data than that right now that's kind of locked up, that people aren't using, that lives in documents, that no one can actually write business logic or rules around, that the computer can't analyze. And so the first thing you have to do is kind of build this like robust data platform that lets you actually structure everything about that loan. Once you've done that, you can use automated analysis to make a risk decision. And you don't need machine learning or AI or any of that stuff. And I'm sure the industry will get there over, let's call it 10 or 20 years. But today, let's be realistic. Like the people that buy the loans are the people who get to make the rules. And those people are not using AI to make the rules or buy the loans.
No. Well, I mean, that's the same reason digital closings haven't taken off, because of the ability to resell.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And
so I think the inevitability is that it will be a very technology-driven industry where it's all about data and it's about analysis. And both of those things can be done by computers.
Right.
And in order for lenders to kind of compete in this new world, what they're going to care about is, what's my customer experience and how am I doing that digitally? Yeah. How am I getting the customer digitally? And then how am I putting the pieces together to make this data and analysis piece as low cost to me as possible, as frictionless and transparent, and then risk-free for me to hand off to the investor, right? And all of that, everything I just talked about, none of that is it's all technology. There will still very much be a human component. They're going to have an advisory role. They're going to have kind of people that oversee all this stuff. Like there will always be people in mortgage, but so much of it is going to be, how do I like mix and match the various pieces of technology and combine them?
Well, and so a lot of what you're saying here focuses on the underwriting aspect, the production aspect, which makes sense, right? That there's rules, there's data, like that makes sense. But I just bought a house, right? This is such a personal decision. What is the loan officer's role, and how does technology make that a little bit easier as we move 5-10 years down the road?
Yeah. So the loan officer, it really is all about, how do you make that customer comfortable? How do you, there is a sales component. I know that that's like not super popular to say, but the reality is,
100%.
Because it's a sales business in a way. And so it really is like, a minute that the loan officer is not spending talking to the customer is probably a minute that they're like not doing the highest leverage thing they could be doing with their job, right? And so I think that a lot of the question is, how do you strip away a lot of this extraneous stuff? How do you strip away asking the borrower for documents? How do you strip away like going and looking the property up on Zillow to make sure it's there? Like, why is your loan officer doing that? How do you strip away a lot of this extraneous stuff with technology? In many ways, that's actually why at Vesta we were like, we're going to build this core loan origination system. We're not going to build borrower facing experience. We're not going to build a bunch of LO sales tools. We're not going to, and a lot of that is like, those aren't going to be technology utilities almost in the future. Like, our point of view is the core technology data platform analysis around processing underwriting is this thing that is just, it's like a ecosystem utility. Like, everyone should just be able to use this technology to take that piece away. And then they're all going to differentiate on their loan officers and the experience that they create in the brand. They're going to differentiate on the customer experience. And so those are things where you're going to want a lot of different vectors to differentiate. And one of them may be the technology you decide to build. Like, what point of sale are you using? Or what sales tools are you giving your loan officers? How do you let them do scenario analysis really easily to to recruit better loan officers and give them the tools to walk the borrowers through the simulations.
Yeah.
But a lot of it's also going to be like, who do you hire? What is your company culture? Like all sorts of stuff that honestly a vendor can't really help you with.
Right.
And so I think that there will be a huge kind of, when you think about differentiating on the sales and the customer experience, there's a huge human component as well.
Yeah.
And to be honest, that's kind of why we stay away from that area. Is I'm like, I don't think that we can help lenders nearly as much as we can on this very technology.
Well, there comes a point in time, I like what you're saying, that like all of this other aspect of it becomes table stakes, right? Like 10 years ago, the idea of a point of sale system didn't exist, right? Now you absolutely need one, right? The idea of a CRM, didn't exist. Now you absolutely need one. There comes a point in time where, all of this is just baked into what you need to do to be a mortgage company. And I think to your point, the idea of that type of automation from the time an application comes in till closing, you can't afford not to have it at some point, and then you can worry about the softer elements, the sales elements, the marketing, the fun stuff, as I call it, of like, how do you actually get to customers, make them helpful, make yourself helpful, and like, define the types of things you do as a business.
Exactly. And that's really where lenders should be focused. Like the fact that lenders are spending a bunch of time thinking about these things that aren't that accretive to the customer is like an inefficiency of the industry, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I can see that. I think so, right? It feels like lenders need to be technology experts, right? And like, will that persist once the tools in the industry get a little bit easier and better? Maybe not, maybe, we'll see, I guess.
We will.
Yeah, I think there'll always be that like technology folks, those folks at a lender, but I think, the lift of what they need can, hopefully go down, I think. So changing topics a little bit, going from Blend, going from the investment side that you were in before that, now you're starting a company, right? You've been a few years into Vesta now. What has surprised you about founding a company, running a business? I really want to dive into that because it's something that's so interesting to me. So I would love to hear about kind of that journey, like what has been easier, what has been harder, what has, totally kicked your ass?
Yeah. There's like a certain level of difficulty that actually comes that I didn't expect, which is there's like the stress and emotional component, which is like the buck stops with you. Like there's one thing that I always remember was like, and I had a great time at Blend. I loved Blend. And every time I had a really hard decision, I had this option, which was I could call Nima and I could be like, Nima, what should I do? And the day I left and I started Vesta, that option was taken away from me. And it turns out that like that's a really valuable option, even if you only exercise it once a year. But you don't, it's like a different level of stress to know that like you have the ultimate accountability and that's on you. And then that only gets worse over time. Like the other thing that I kind of believed or was hopeful about was like, maybe this gets easier over time. Like you get used to it. And instead what happens is you realize you raise some money from investors. Well, now you have more parties that you're accountable to and more people you can't let down. Then you hire employees. And now you have more people you can't let down. And then you have customers take a bet on you. And they're like, oh my God, like now this thing has to work. And so the pressure has like monotonically gotten worse. Even though I was like, oh, maybe, after we raise $30 million, it'll be easier. After we like hire this key person, it'll be easier. After our first 3 customers, it'll be easier. And like no, it actually just like the pressure ratchets up over and over. And so that definitely has been the surprisingly hard part. I mean, I think that the other piece obviously is just like we're building something that most people say is crazy. We kind of started and we thought we had like a pretty good idea of what an LOS did. I feel looking back on it, we had a pretty good idea of what an LOS did. I don't know if there's anyone in the world anymore who knows everything that they do in their LOS. It's just like, because we would go into these shadowing sessions with lenders and like, sometimes the VP of technology wants to come along and see, and they think they know all the requirements. And they look at what their, processors or underwriters are doing. And they're like, we didn't know that our LOS did that. And so you're just like kind of doing this archaeological dig. Like I actually tell early partners, like, we have a few core insights on how people should originate mortgages. And we think that like there are huge benefits to being first to partner with us on these insights, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is, and we know that the LOS is this like massive dinosaur. And what we have to do together is go on this archaeological dig to figure out everything that's in there and make sure that we put it in and frame it against these core insights so that we can build you the best system. And so I've honestly just been like shocked at the complexity of the problem, even knowing that it was going to be probably like twice as big as we thought it was.
Yeah.
It was probably then twice as big as that again.
Right. And then, I mean, the good thing about where you're at in technology is now you're not trying to over optimize and check every box. You build something that's flexible that can handle those requirements, because there'll always be one, right? I swear clients, when we talk to them, they thrive on finding that type of loan file that you haven't seen before. Like, especially title agents, they just want to stump you. Like, even if this happens 0.1% of the time, they're like, what about a second appraisal, but it's a different appraiser, and then there's a rush fee. So how do we do that? Right? Like, every time, like there's no, I've seen a whole lot in 9 years in fees, and someone's always trying to stump you, right? And you can't build out to anything. You just have to build a system that's going to be flexible enough for the things that you don't know. So I think, to your dinosaur reference, you just want to be that velociraptor, right? At the end of the day, you just want to be fast enough to be able to, adapt to the things as they change.
Definitely.
Yeah. No, I like that a lot. So in running the business so far and dealing with those stresses, how do you handle that? How do you deal with those things as they change? How do you deal with that personally?
Yeah, the most important thing, and I really believe this, is that you just have to build a team that you can trust.
Yeah.
And that you really have a deep respect for, like every single person.
Yeah.
And it is all about the team. I say this a lot to my team, which is like, none of this is rocket science. Like, people have asked for years and years, like, someone probably should build a new LOS. Like, that's not actually that surprising. I think we have some good ideas. I don't think our ideas are things that we talk about and people go like, oh, you know what? We didn't think of that idea. If we had that idea, we could build this too. Like, at the end of the day, it's kind of like, it's a game of inches, and you just have to like put one foot in front of the other, like over and over and over again. And so the only advantage that you have is you have to build a team that is like incredibly capable, that really has all of the right values and the right alignment. And if you build that set of people, it also can be fun, which is like crazy. If someone was like, oh, is it fun to do, the 2000, doc engine mappings that, we're going to have to go do tomorrow or whatever. I don't think anybody in the right mind is going to be like, oh, like that's normally my idea of like a fun weekend. Right. But it is about, I think, doing it with the right people and feeling that sense of accomplishment together. And that's also kind of what lets you, or has let me at least, kind of like offload some of that burden to being able to tell my team, like, I trust you.
Yeah.
You figure this out. Obviously, they still probably have like the ultimate trick that I always had at Blenders. Like, they can call me and be like, no, Mike, I need you to decide. But being able to make fewer decisions is really helpful. Just hiring the right people. That's probably been the big thing that. Yeah.
And actually empowering them with information, I think. And that took me a while to learn, of actually sharing the information you have and not feeling like you're, scared to be like, hey, here's the actual full problem, right? Of like, here's the problem. What do you think? Yeah.
And that's, being transparent is hard, but it's so important. Like, in today's market, it's so easy to just be like, oh, like that doesn't really affect us. Oh, we're not really thinking about that right now. But no, the reality is, like, there was, from May to July, every 2 weeks, I get in front of the whole company and, we talk about what's on my mind. I'm like, so this was the inflation print. This is why this is bad. These are the lenders that blew up. Like, these are all like the bad things that are in our industry. I was like, aren't you scared that everyone's going to quit? I'm like, well, they know anyways. Like, this is my philosophy.
It's worse if you don't talk. I do the same thing on our monthly calls. I pick a headline every month about how the industry's going. And it's worse if you don't do it, because they all see the headlines, right? Their friends, their family, people are sending them, headlines about what's happening in the industry. It's not like they're living in a bubble. So, if you don't handle it head on, you're screwed.
Yeah, my rule on this is everybody knows, like, you think you're like not telling them, and you're like, no, they know anyways. All they also know now is that you're not willing to talk about it. Yeah.
No, I think, it's a level of respect, being like, I know you guys know this is how we handle it. And I think it's always good to be, clarity is one of our core values. So I feel very strongly about that.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so, as a business leader, then what moments are you most proud of?
Yeah. Actually, I tell the team this a lot, just across my time at Blend and at Vesta. Yeah. There are just a lot of big projects that the things I'm also proud of, these like big projects where at the beginning, I actually had no idea how they were going to happen. So, for example, like in the early days of Blend, I somehow, through some like shuffling, and I was like 21 at the time, got put on the Wells Fargo project. I was like, we need to launch the Wells Fargo pilot by like this date in November of 2016. And we're like 3 weeks before that date. And I was like, I have no idea how there are like, 100 items on the backlog. I'm like, I have no idea how on earth we're like possibly going to figure this out. But you don't think there's no choice, honestly, right? Like that big project, that point in the company, like we were still pretty young. You don't have a choice. Like you have to figure it out. And we figured it out. And that's a moment I'm still like to this day really proud of, like sitting there in Des Moines, like when the first bar went through. Similarly, when COVID happened, Glenn did this big like PPP project with M&T. And I think there was a bunch of press that we did, which was like we did it in 72 hours. And I go, that's great, everyone. Think about what the first of those 72 hours felt like. And so we're sitting there, and I remember very distinctly calling the engineer, and I was like, Arjun, I actually don't know if we're going to be able to do this. Like, these are all the things we do.
I was
like,
about to say, how many of those 72 hours did you sleep?
Probably like 4.
Yeah.
The night before, we realized that, if DocuSign was down, like they wouldn't be able to sign their app, and that was just like unacceptable. And so we were up all night building a workaround so that if DocuSign was down, someone could still like download their app that they had pre-filled and sign it and upload it. Which was, thank goodness we did that, because then there were like 20,000 apps in the first 2 hours. And so it was like, but another moment that I'm very proud of, another moment where at the beginning I was like, oh my God, I have no idea how we're going to do this. And sometimes at Vesta, I have this feeling too, and I tell the team, like, I'm actually not sure how we're going to do this, but we're going to have to find a way through. At Vesta, I think the thing I'm definitely most proud of is, again, just the team we've built, like the people we've been able to attract. We've had the great fortune of being able to raise a lot of money, which I think speaks to the pain of the problem and also the team we've been able to build. And of course, like, we're very proud of that as well. And the first couple lenders going live, which has been a recent development, were more of those projects where we were like, oh, we have no idea how this is going to happen. And you just kind of have to fight your way through. And it really is, there's no silver bullet, right? It's like, just you have 100 issues on the backlog. Yeah, it turns out there are 100 issues on the backlog. You can't ship 5 lines of code that fix your 100 issues. You just take them one at a time, 3 a day for the next, month, and you get through it.
Yeah. So I remember those days when the phone rang and I was just nervous of like, what's wrong now? Like, what do I have to fix? Like, I would cringe too. We would just look at each other and be like, oh, damn it. Like, so. Yeah. But it gets better for sure. So the last question we always like to ask people for this season, Lodestar is, I named the company that because it's a guiding light. It's a principle that, like a North Star. So I want to ask everyone, what's your personal North Star? What motivates you on those days where you don't feel like shipping code, where you don't feel like going through the 2,000 fee mappings that you mentioned, any of that type of stuff? You don't feel like dealing with whatever problem is on your desk.
Yeah, I tell everyone this a lot. So we have a core value at Vesta, which is this idea of craftsmanship, which is like, I've said it a few times, even in this conversation, like, I really believe there's no magic in like the idea. There's no magic in being smarter than everyone else. There's no magic in the insight. It really is about like doing the very like honest work. It's like building a product that you're really proud of, solving that problem for people. And you have to like take joy in the work itself. Yeah. And in doing it to a really high bar. And I think that in a lot of ways, like when it comes to how we think about framing Vesta, when it comes to like, what is that guiding light? What inspires us? I think, look, there's a lot of vision that goes into Vesta. There's a lot of excitement around what the industry can be and where it's going to go and all of those things. But I think on a day-to-day basis, the thing that really has to keep you going is you have to enjoy the work that you're doing and the people that you're doing it with, because it is a long journey and there are a lot of really hard times, and it's going to be thankless a lot of the time too. And so really just climbing that mountain, one foot in front of the other, for its own sake is kind of the thing that I think keeps us going. Yeah, the phone rings a lot less when things are going right, huh? Hopefully. Yeah. We'll find out. No, that was a beautiful answer. I really like the idea of craftsmanship and, just loving the product, loving, the struggle. Because I think if you don't do that, no end that you're going to reach will ever be worth it. There'll always be, something else that you think you need to hit to be happy, but you just have to, really fall in love with the process. Definitely. So great. Well, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate your time today, Mike. This was a fun conversation. Yeah. Thanks for having me. It was really great to see you, and we'll chat soon. Yeah. Have a good one. Thank you for listening to Lodestar's Lending Leaders. Please like, subscribe, and rate us 5 stars anywhere you get your podcast.
to give a special thank you to the Lodestar team involved in the production of this podcast, including Elena Gardner, Tim Austin, and John Gardner.